Well now, welcome back to the channel everyone. I'm your host, Cryptid Master KD, coming at you from the lair of the Cryptid Master KD YouTube channel. In today's story, we will be going over one of the most terrifying myths in Scottish folklore. One that has inspired books and movies for all the way to this very day. For you see, in the misty wilds of 16th century Scotland, roads were a dangerous place. Bandits and highwaymen hunted the paths. Wolves stalked the forests. And disappearance and robberies were common. But one of the most terrifying legends started when one day a group of merchants went missing. Their horses found riderless. Their carts abandoned on the road. But of the men themselves, there was no trace. There was no sign of them. At first, locals and authorities turned a blind eye, explained it by wolves or highwaymen. But when more travelers went missing, a dark rumor began to spread. A rumor of a family that lived not in a cottage or a house or a village, but in a hidden lair on the coasts of Benane Head. When the authorities finally took notice, they were not prepared for what they found. Stacks of bones, human bones, grim stores of preserved flesh, and macabre piles of more bones. And in the shadow of that cave, they found just not one killer, but an entire clan. Men, women, and children, all raised in blood. This was the legend of Alexander Sawney Bean, Scotland's most infamous cannibal killer. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask you all something. If you believe in these dark myths I tell on this channel, if you believe that the unknown still has stories to tell us, I need to ask you to please subscribe. If you're new to the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. And comment below what you think. Your support keeps the torch fire going and allows us to cut through the mysteries in these dark tales. Now, let's get into this tale. Alexander Sawney Bean was not the kind of man known for achievement or skill. Born into poverty in East Lothian, he grew up among farmers, traders, and merchants. His father was a ditch digger and a hedge trimmer. It was a job of low prestige, but steady enough to get a man by in those dark times. But Sawney was different. From an early age, he had a deep contempt for hard labor and those who engaged in it. Neighbors and people who knew him of the time described him as idle and subtle, and that he was very rude and defiant. When his one time he tried his father's legacy of ditch digging and hedge trimming. But like I said, it was a low prestige, but steady to get a man by. But even in these activities, Sawney Bean's resentment grew, and his resentment towards hard labor grew and grew, and eventually he abandoned it altogether. The failure was not surprising to those around him, and eventually the boy ran away. The man drifted on the edge of society, too proud to work, too stubborn to change, too unskilled to rise. Basically, he was damn right lazy. And it was during this period of wandering when he met the woman who would alter the course of his life. Her name was Agnes Douglas. Now, history knows little about her. Some say she was a witch cast out of her village for cruelty. But upon meeting Sawney Bean, the two would recognize themselves in each other. They both saw themselves as if it was love at first sight. Resentful, idle, and hostile to the worlds beyond their bond. Together they would leave civilization. Now, for most people back then, leaving civilization was a punishment, the loss of home, kin, and family. But to them, it was liberation. The two would wander towards the coasts of Benning Head, where eventually, and their marriage was less a marriage, but a pact with darkness itself. It was during this time of wandering that brought them to Benning Head, on the cliffs of Ayrshire. There they found what they were looking for, a cave. In this new cave environment, they felt they were free to do as they wished, to be as evil and cruel as they wanted. Most of the day, the cave's entrance was blocked by the sea, making it a perfect hiding place. Inside the winding passages of this cave, the couple found both security and space. The couple found a fortress within the rocks. But a fortress is nothing without resources. For you see, life on the coast, I should know, is very hard indeed. There's no soil to till. Hunting was scarce. Farming was unreliable. Fishing brought meager returns. But eventually, that's when they started robbing, for it was the roads above them that offered the answer. At, at first, their methods were hesitant. They lingered on the cliffside, watching, learning, like any predator. Like predators, they watched, learned, and understand the routes and the tradesmen who followed in it. When they finally struck, it was without hesitation. The first victim that they claimed was not a nobleman, a knight, or even a merchant, but a laborer, an elderly laborer making his way home. He carried little of value, a few tools, trinkets, and scraps of food. It was at that point, when he entered the area of Benin Head, that Sawney and his wife struck without hesitation. The man was pulled from the road, his throat cut before he could cry out. His disappearance was unnoticed for some time. Inside the cave, however, his body became something more significant. Flesh and meat was plentiful. And at first, flesh was roasted immediately. The smell of cooked flesh filling the chamber. And as dark as it was, they pressed on, dividing the body into portions and making each part of it a resource. And the realization of it all was intoxicating. Why till soil when murder could sustain them? Why rely on hunting or normal survival skills when the road provided all they needed? It was a revelation they could not pass. Because for the first time, the cavern's larder was full. It was a new transformation that sealed their place in the world. They would eventually have children. Now, for most families, children are raised in the frameworks of society. We all know this. We all grew up. And most children are raised within the frameworks of society. They learn to work, to speak, to work, to learn, to worship, and to live among society in normal society. But the children of Sawney Bean were born into none of those cases. Agnes Bean gave life to child after child. I guess from these days you would be due for a lot of child support. Not yet. They were born from as Agnes Bean grew child after child, they would eventually have 5 sons. They would eventually have 8 sons, 6 daughters. And while it was common and childhood for the Beans was unlike any other. They were all, while normal people were, as I told you, work, worship, all that, they were given none of these lessons. From the early ages, they learned only the family's only number one trait. They watched and learned as bodies were dragged into the cave, and learning how to strip, and they were not raised to question, but raised to participate and obey. They've each one of them, as soon as they could walk, as soon as they could speak or any of that, or grow up, they were given tasks of their own. Some helped carry bodies into the cavern and strip them. Others helped gather wood for the fires that roasted flesh. By the time Sonny Bean's children grew up, it became a more dire situation, and they would eventually have kids of their own. However, the security and the isolation of the cave made sure that the family turned inward. Incest was inevitable when no other options existed. Eventually, the clan would swell to over 50 members. Some records say 49 members. There's men, women, and children, all raised in blood. As the years went by, the family would grow rapidly. I already told you how many there were. Over 25 years, they learned how to hunt, how to imitate normal cave acoustics when they were to ensure that the family stay hidden. Each generation was more further from the outside world than the first. A new disaster was born every day. And the killings, oh God, the killings. Records say they killed over 1,000 people. In the villages above, fear turned to panic. Heck, several people, innkeepers, were accused of disappearance after they were the last people to know where the people who disappeared. And sadly, many of them were put to death, but none of it stopped the killings. Eventually, it got so bad that King James VI, it reached his ears that something was going on near Benning Head. At first, he turned a blind eye to it, but when the disappearances started affecting the royal treasury is when the matter got serious. One thing the clan always practiced is that there were no survivors, so that no one could tell the tale of their activities or where they were or that they even existed. However, the first account that led to the clan's capture occurred following a young couple. A man and his wife were riding horses along Benane Head. And they were returning from a wedding party in Maybole. According to this side of the story, they were ambushed by the Sawney Bean clan. The wife was killed, dragged from her horse, and her intestines pulled out. But the man who had military experiences and a veteran of war fought back. But before the Sawney Bean clan could overwhelm him, the rest of the wedding party people came and managed to drive them off. For the first time ever, there were survivors. After this event, the man would tell his story to the authorities, who then went to the ears of King James VI. This story reached King James, and he was not a man to tolerate this disorder that it was affecting his land. Records show that he was a man who didn't tolerate such things. And finally, the king decided to take up arms and find the culprits once and for all. When the royal proclamation was made, it did so with great urgency. He assembled over 400 men, many of them veterans of the war with England. And eventually, they made their way to the coast. The people who now saw these veteran warriors cutting through the blades of the darkness that haunted them, many of them were cross with themselves. Others wept. At last, the crown was taking up control of the situation, and the hunt for the Sawney Bean clan was about to begin. At first, the searches came up empty. The people in the villages were asked many times of where the last disappearance took place. But eventually, when the king's army arrived near the Ayrshire coast, near Benning Head, that's when the dogs came in. Bloodhounds trained to track fugitives. That is when the dogs tracked the smell of rotting flesh to a nearby opening in the cliffside. And that's when they found it. A cave. The cave. And the torches were lit. They moved into the cave like in single file, ready to face what was on the other side. For years they had heard from the locals about demons, witches, and highwaymen in the area. But nothing prepared them for this. Eventually they would reach the inside of the opening, which opened up into a tunnel. And what they found horrified them more than any battlefield could. Bones. Piles and piles of bones. Stacked up. and some of them carried candles in the walls. And when they found the larders, what they found was more disturbing. Limbs dangling, body parts strung in as if it was in a butcher shop. The smell was overwhelming. Now keep in mind, these men had fought bandits. They had fought rebels, enemies. They'd seen the dead on battlefields. But this was different, because this wasn't like a military base. This was organized butchery. Eventually, as they moved deeper into the cave, in the farthest chamber, they found the family. Nearly 50 of them. By many accounts, men, women, and children. Their eyes wild in the torchlight. Some snarled like cornered animals. Others shrieked, and some tried to flee deeper into the cave. But there was nowhere to run. Eventually, the clan fought and tried to hold out for some time. But the rising tide of steel and dogs barking at their heels was too much. The men and women of the clan were bound in chains and escorted back to the town of they were escorted back, bound in chains. King James I, after reviewing all the evidence, made a decision that would be questioned by many authorities and inspected and people of justice systems for centuries to come. He declared that no trial would be needed for creatures like these. He ordered them guilty and sentenced them to death. And what happened next was more gruesome. So if you made it this far in the video and you don't want to hear it, I suggest you'd better cover your ears. Too late. The men of the clan had their arms and legs amputated, their private parts amputated. They were left to bleed slowly, while the women watched. The men and women, however, the women and the children, however, met a different fate. They were bound together and cast into great fires. What many historians and such differ is that the fact that the women and the children showed no real reaction to the entire thing. They showed more curiosity than fear. They showed no need to protect their children, like a separation disorder or something. But anyway, all the clan members were officially wiped off the face of this world. This was not an execution, it was eradication. Sawney Bean himself is said to have fought until the last. Some tales say he cursed the king, spitting blood and threats until his tongue was torn from his mouth. Others say before he was finally beheaded and executed, he declared that some say he actually laughed, declaring that Scotland had fed him well, and his bloodline would be remembered long after those who condemned him. Whatever the truth of the situation, his end was brutal as his life. Piece by piece, he was destroyed until nothing of the man remained. The story of Sawney Bean tells us what many people back then thought is this is what happens, especially to the church. They declared that this is the sin of what happens when people stray from divine guidance. This, as for the cave itself, was sealed and declared cursed ground. But the question I'm sure everybody is asking at this point, where does history end and folklore begin? Well, many historians argue that the beans never existed, as there aren't many records of them. No records of the king assembling armies. However, if you are into movies, there was a movie made inspired by the legend, none other than The Hills Have Eyes. So I'll leave you with that to those of you who watched it. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this story. And this is one of my longer videos. Jesus Christ, it's been 30 minutes. And now, I'm going to leave you all with the trauma of what you just heard. I hope you all enjoyed the video. And if you think the beings may or may not have existed, put maybe yes existed in the comments, or maybe, or not at all. As like I said, there are no records. I'd like to know what you all think of this story. Please, all of you, like, comment, subscribe. I love you all. Thank you for sticking around this long. And peace out.